So, how's your kidney doing today? You're probably not thinking about your kidney. You're probably thinking about your bladder, but not your kidney. Most of who you are is not what defines who you are. Most of who you think you are is what others think you are, which in fact you would hope is who you really are. So who are we? Most people would say that we are what is conveyed through our faces, our beliefs, our celebrations, our emotions. We communicate with our hands in ways that are explicit and in ways that are implicit. And we also communicate with our voices, usually aided by our hands and our face. This is what most people would say, that's who we are. So who are they? Who do they think they are? What voice is given to the voiceless? And how does she communicate? And what can we do for them? It turns out quite a lot. I entitled this talk Human Transplantation because that's what I think VCA really is. The field that I'm involved in is called Vascularized Composite Allotransplantation, which is the transplantation of peripheral tissues like skin, muscle, bone, nerve, with the vascular supply as a functional unit, like the hand. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. My first language is Spanish. And when I finished high school, I won a scholarship by merit to do my international baccalaureate outside my country. And I chose to go to Mbabane, Swaziland, in one of the 3 kingdoms in Africa. I was the first Colombian at that college, and we were 350 students from 72 different countries. I changed language, I changed countries, I changed continents, I changed hemisphere, and I changed the structure that I was used to studying. I went on to finish my medical school in Mexico City, and I've always been very interested in doing research. I like understanding and answering questions in a scientific way. So the last year of my medical school, I chose to do it in immunology and rheumatology. And a patient was who inspired me to think for the first time about a hand transplant. At the time, I didn't know anybody who had done a hand transplant. I hadn't heard about a hand transplant. I hadn't spoken with anybody about hand transplantation. And years later, I was fortunate to be in the first hand team that performed the first hand transplant and the second hand transplants in the United States. But like any new field, thank you. Like any new field, we have scientific questions. What were the animals to study these tissues? How do we talk to each other when we do our research? And how can we communicate our findings? What anti-rejection medication do we use? What is the how is the risk-benefit ratio and the safe implementation of this field in this country? And what are the functional outcomes? And these have been the areas that I have been focusing in my career. So we established an animal model in rodents to study the mechanisms of how all these tissues behave after transplantation. We also established a non-human primate model that follows the high ethical requirements for experimentation. And these animals, even in the case of graft loss, when we transplant the skin and the bone and the tendon and the nerve, they do not lose any function. But it allows us, this model allows us to test biologics that are very specific to human, with human specificity, which is the only way to do it. With this model, we have been able to study not only the behavior of the tissues, but we have been able to study a new medication that we have learned from transplantation that works in kidney transplantation that is called belatacept. We have been the first to show that this medication prevents rejection in non-human primates in this type of transplant, and have also been the first to show that this medication prevents rejection in human hand transplantation in patients that have received hands. We didn't have a common language in which to report our results, so we gathered investigators from around the world who had performed a clinical VCA, and through consensus discussions, we developed a scoring system to report rejection in the skin, and now is the common language that all teams around the world use to report their results. It is important to do this with real careful thought. I was fortunate to be the inaugural committee chair for the American Society of Transplant Surgeons. And we put forward recommendations to add this type of transplant under the definition of solid organ transplantation. And the final rule came out, and now I serve in the committee at UNOS, developing the guidelines for a safe implementation of this type of transplant in the country. This is one of the most complex things you could ever imagine. This is clinical research at its finest. And the only way to do it is based on our very strong multidisciplinary approach. And we have it at Duke. And people ask me, how big is your team? And my answer is half of Duke University. This is a low volume type of research or application. And we also collaborate nationally. We lead the consortium on VCA. We collaborate with 5 outstanding institutions around the country who also have a preclinical and a clinical setting for the study of VCA. So we stick to good scientific principles, but we shouldn't lose track of what these can really do. As an example, let me share with you one of my cases. Miss L, who has given me consent to share the story. Miss L lost her left hand and both her lower extremities when she was 4 months old. When she turned 21, she was getting ready to go and celebrate with her friends, her 21st birthday. And as she wrote to me, my prosthesis broke again, and she couldn't go out. She went onto the website at 3 o'clock in the morning on that Saturday and sent me an email looking for an option to change her life. I spoke with her the very same day. She went through a very thorough evaluation, and after months, she went on the waiting list. And after months of being on the waiting list, a gracious family donated a hand for her. It took us 19 hours to do the surgery. And every time I do this, and I can do this 1,000,000 times, I will never stop feeling thrilled when I see someone's hand come back. We match for skin pigmentation sex, blood type, and size. They go through extensive therapy, and she used to spend hours looking at her new body image. And I used to think, I wonder what she's thinking. I don't know what she was thinking, but she allowed us to learn that for somebody who loses the hand at 4 months of age and gets a hand transplant at 21 years old, the area in the brain where that hand was represented initially that didn't have representation for 21 years comes back after 54 days. She went, like all these patients, through a very extensive rehabilitation, occupational therapy. So the therapist used to do her therapy from Monday through Friday, and because the studies have shown that the more occupational therapy they do within the first 3 to 6 months, the better the outcome. I used to do her therapy on Saturday mornings. That gave us a very nice opportunity to also learn about each other. And it was time, in our conversations to learn, and she learned that I like brownies. And when the therapist asked her what was the activity that she wanted to translate to in anticipation for going back home, the first occupational activity, she made brownies for me. Needless to say, these are the most special brownies I've ever tasted. She now uses her hand instinctively. She has played golf for the first time in her life. She has played baseball for the first time in her life. She has played the guitar for the first time in her life. If you ask her who she was, it was not her kidney. It was not her liver. It wasn't even her hand. It was her ability to do what she wanted to do and how she felt about herself. At the end of the day, that's why we're here, and that's why we do research. Thank you.